our next question is very similar to the data handling task that we usually do it as a formative assessment during the year. Now, what is data handling? It means data has been presented to us and we need to analyze this data and read the data from what's been given to us and answer the questions. Now, if we have a look at the data that's been presented to us, it shows us a bar graph, okay? And in this bar graph, just quickly have a look at this graph that's been given to us. It shows us the rural population, the percentage of the total population in South Africa was last measured at 35.20 in 2015, according to the World Bank. Now keep in mind, we are in the year 2020, so can't we just forget about the year 2020? After all, but let's just quickly go back to our graph. If you look at it, according to the World Bank, rural populations refer to people living in rural areas as defined by the National Statistical Offices. Now, when we looked at this question, we also can look at previous questions. We already discussed the rural settlements. Okay, yes, I'm being repetitive. What do? We focus on primary activities, farming, fishing, forestry, and mining. So what does this graph basically shows us? It shows us the population shrinking over the years because people, what's happening? What's that definition? It's the rural-urban migration of people. People leave the rural areas, they move to the urban areas, okay? So this graph represents that movement taking place. As you can see, in 2004, still many people, 42% of people still living in rural areas. So that means there was many employment opportunities. You can remember we looked at these push and pull factors. So basically there was no push factors pushing people away from the rural areas. Service delivery was still great in 2004. It means the schools was great. There was decent infrastructure, decent roads. It means there was decent water supply, for instance, irrigation for the farmers, electricity supply. It means it was still safe to live in rural areas, especially when you're a farmer, if you look at crime-related incidents on farms. And as we continue, if you look at this graph, the rural population is declining over the years. Okay. So it means we can see that many people are moving from the rural areas to urban areas to seek better opportunities, better employment opportunities, better services, better healthcare, etc. We did discuss this. Now, if we quickly have a look at this question, 3.4. Study figure 3.4, which shows this trend of rural population in South Africa from 2004 to 2015. Now, immediately, grade 12, we established. What's the trend? Okay, people are moving away. Have a look at it. Okay, there's less and less people left in the rural areas. Now, if you look at question 3.4.1, comment on the trend from 2004 to 2015 in the graph regarding people living in rural areas in South Africa. Now, the trend definitely is, and I'm going to write the answers down, because this is how you should answer questions relating data. For instance, this graph represents the data that's been given to us. So it's definitely, there's a decrease of people living in rural areas. Grade 12s, I'm not going to repeat myself. I've mentioned in the previous question, this is just related to the graph, but we're going to look into it. Keep in mind your push and pull factors, okay? You need to interpret it. Why is this happening? But if we look at our next question, 3.4.2, what percentage of South Africans lived in rural areas in 2015? I just want to write down there. Now, where will I get this information from? I will get this information from the graph itself. Now, On your x-axis represents the percentage of people. On your y-axis, you have the years. Now, as you can see, they've numbered the years 2004. So obviously, this bar over here represents 2005. 2006, I'm just going to write 07, 08, 09, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2014. Okay, sorry, apologies, 2015. Let's get a pen. So that small bar graph right in the end represents 2015. Now the question states, what percentage of South Africans lived in rural areas in 2015? Now if that's 34% and that's 36%, if I had to go and draw a line right in the middle between the two of them, that will represent 35%, am I correct? But as you can see, the graph is a little bit higher than the 35%. So the correct answer will be roughly 35.2 to 35.3%. Because as you can see, just pay careful attention to the last bar graph. If you had to divide the space between 34 and 36, we know it will be 35. And as you can see, the graph's a little bit taller than 35. So anything from 35.2 to 35.3 degrees. Apologies, percentage. Okay. Now if you look at our next question, 3.4.3, give a projected percentage for the South African rural population in 2018. Now you need to give a projection. Now as you can see, it's been steadily declining over the years. Now a projection is basically you need to almost, you can, yes, it's not guessing, but by looking at the stats in front of you, the data in front of you, you can make a calculated guess, and that's a projection, how many people will be leaving the rural areas in 2018. So if we go back to our bar graph, and let's just add another couple of blocks. If that's 2014, that's going to be 2015. So there we have 2016, 2017, 2018. Now, as you can see, the projection of this bar graph shows us it's declining. Okay, completely declining. Now, as you can see, every single year from 2014 up until 2018, let's just assume it decreases by that much. Where do you think the bar graph will be represented in 2018? Probably less than 34%. Do you think we will actually have a graph representing 34%? Probably not, because over the years, there's an increase of people moving away from the rural areas to the urban areas. So the projection, by just looking at our graph, going back to our graph, just want to wipe this off quickly, will probably be less than 34, because every single year you can see a quarter of this graph as it's shrinking, this bar graph, every single year. Now 2015, if you have a look over there, let's assume there's 2015, 2016, 2017, definitely less than 34%. So the correct answer for question 3.4.3 will be 34%, let's say 34.5%. Okay, so it's a calculated projection that we're making over here by looking at our bar graph. If we look at question 3.4.4, what impact will the trend in question 3.4.1 have on rural areas in the future? Now, let's just quickly go back to our statistics, to our percentages over here. So keep in mind, we're talking of a population of 100% over here. So it means that what's going to be left in 2018? Only 34% of the people in South Africa is going to be left in our rural areas. So if we just have a look at that, that means 60, 100 minus 34 is going to give us 66% of the total population of South Africa is going to be urbanized. It means 66% of all the people in South Africa is going to live in major cities such as Johannesburg, Bloemfontein, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, etc. Now, just imagine the amount of problems that's going to create. Okay, overcrowding, urban sprawl. Okay, service delivery, informal settlements getting bigger. Okay, schools, just think of it, how many children per classroom. Okay, just imagine the huge amount of pressure on healthcare facilities. So that means only 34% of people in the whole of South Africa is going to be left in the rural areas. So going back to my question, what impact will the trend in question 3.4.1 have in rural areas in the future? That's going to be quite scary. Now, if so many people are moving away from rural areas, what's going to be left? You need to ask yourself, what's going to be basically left? Remember, it can't be productive if the majority of the people has moved away. So I'm going to mention a couple of options to you. So the question is 3.4.4. So what's the impact it's going to have? Obviously, it leads to rural depopulation. People moving away. There's not many people left. And unfortunately, family units are going to be broken up. Because many of the families, especially think of it, matriculants leaving school to go and find jobs in urban areas. Okay, because they can't find jobs in the rural areas. People going looking for work because many of the people, original farmers, has migrated. So now all of a sudden there's no more jobs available. So what happens? Many families, basically, the units are being broken up. And many families sometimes create themselves a new family somewhere else, leaving an aging population. We usually just find old people in the rural areas. Okay. Unfortunately, with this rural-urban migration, the cycle of poverty takes place. It means people just get more poor and poorer as the years continue because there's no employment opportunity, there's no services that's been provided for them because there's no point to provide services if there's no people. But unfortunately, there is still people being left behind. If we go ahead and have a look at another reason we can mention over here, the economy is going to decline. So let's just assume you own a barber shop or you own a cafe, right? Or you own a restaurant. Now, if so many people are moving, as you can see with our graph, the total percentage over the years, is it viable to have a restaurant in a small rural community? Is it viable to have a cafe in a rural community? Is it viable to have a barber shop or a salon in a rural community? Definitely not, because you won't be able to support, they won't be able to support your income, meaning there's not enough people that you can deliver a service to be able to have a proper income. So it's quite scary actually if you kind of think of it. Okay, economy is definitely gonna decline. Basic services. Such as schools and clinics will close. Now, if you have a declining rural population and everyone has moved away, and there's an aging population, who's going to fill the schools? Unfortunately, these places are going to close down over a matter of time. And last but not least, there's going to be a lack of investment. Now, if there's no people spending money, if there's no consumers Why will I go and invest in a place like a rural settlement? Why will you throw your money into an area where you know no one will buy your product or use your product? So it means at the end of the day, we're going to lack investments. And once again, the cycle of poverty is going to continue. If we look at our next question, if the trend in question 3.4.1 continues, South Africa might head for food insecurity in the near future. Now, this term is extremely important. Grade 12, food security, insecurity. Okay, food insecurity means we do not have enough food on a daily basis. Okay, food security means we do have enough food. Okay, food security doesn't mean that people are looking after food, protecting food. Believe it or not, got that answer a couple of times in final papers. Food insecurity means there's not enough food for the population. Okay, food security means there's enough food for the entire population. Now, let's make that very clear. Okay, insecurity means there's not enough. Okay, now, the question states, if the trend in question 3.4.1 continues, South Africa might head for food insecurity. Because what do we do in farming in rural areas? We farm. We are being productive. We create crops, staple food to provide us to eat. Okay. Most of our rural areas provide us with farming. Okay. Now, if this trend is going to continue, and keep in mind, our population size are getting bigger each year. It means we're going to experience food insecurity. There's not going to be enough food to feed the population. And that's a crisis. That's a massive, massive crisis. So the question states, in the paragraph, outline sustainable measures to ensure continued food security. So the question states, what can we do? What did I tell you what's sustainable? Sustainable is to do it in such a way that we can keep doing it for future generations. Okay. But we need to create food security, though we're seeing the declining population of rural settlements. So it means, so we're sitting in a situation over here, right? People are living in rural settlements. These people are the bread and butter for the country. They provide us with food. So now we need to come up with ideas to make sure, even though people are moving to urban areas, that the minimum number of people still in rural settlements can provide us with food. But we need to do it in such a way that it's sustainable, that we can keep doing it for years to come. And very importantly, we need to create food security to feed us. Now, I'm going to write the ideas down there and we're going to discuss them. Okay, and that was question 3.4.5. What can we do to make sure we don't go hungry? That's the question. Okay, first of all, because why do many farmers leave? We looked at it. Pull and push factors. People leave because they experience a flood, they experience a drought. Okay, so let's assume it happens with a farmer. What can we do to support that farmer to make sure, okay, listen, even though you experience a drought this season and might be the previous season, what can we do to make sure you stay put, get through this difficult time, and provide us with the necessary crop? So first of all, we can make plans with irrigation. What is irrigation? Provide them with water. So what can we do? Water transfer schemes. Okay. Now, grade 12, unfortunately, South Africa is quite a dry country. Yes, we do have a hell of a lot of resources. We have gold, we have platinum, we have diamonds. But unfortunately, we do lack water. Okay. Water is not only important for us, but obviously to feed us. So we have a couple of these water transfer schemes. You've learned about it in grade 11. We have the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So because obviously Lesotho is a very high-lying area, it collects water in the Maluti Mountains. Obviously, it's a transfer scheme this water are then transferred to the Vol Dam, providing farmers in the surrounding areas of water. So irrigation is very important. Water transfer schemes are very important. So in case these farmers experience a drought, we have these transfer schemes, water transfer schemes, to provide them with the necessary water for irrigation purposes. Very important. A next point that we can make is we can encourage investment. Support these farmers, right? Especially during difficult times. Provide them with capital, right? Provide them with better farming methods or farming tools. So give them investment so they can improve the turnaround to make sure that we have food security. So encourage investments. Okay, especially when we look at farming projects. Explore new options. Explore new types of crop. Okay, so farming projects, especially, we don't need to think just commercially, but we need to think of the people that's still in the rural communities. We're talking about this little 34% that we discussed in 2018 of people still living in the rural areas. So give them farming projects. How can they be more sustainable? Now, keep in mind, we have many traditional farmers, for instance, sustainable farmers. These people only farm for themselves, right? So they do not farm to sell their product to make a profit, okay? They farm only for themselves. So give them farming projects. For instance, show them better ways to farm, right? Show them how they can be more productive. So if we look at farming projects, how to be more productive. Okay, for instance, what else can we do? We can improve food production. And how do we do that? Like I've mentioned, the same as the projects, we can improve farming methods and techniques. Farming methods and techniques. Now keep in mind, we need to improve. There's new technology every single day. So we can apply this technology, right, to make 100% sure that we can improve our crop production. Okay, for instance, there's so many different weather apps. Like for instance, we can use new technology to assume, listen, when might we expect our next drought? Okay, if we look at rainfall seasons, like for instance, can we improve how we can produce our crops by planting more this year, maybe get a grant or loan. All of this, we can connect all of these together, get more investment, because we know, okay, listen, we're going to experience average above normal rainfall. It means we can plant more crops. So in case, if that happens, it means we can improve our techniques to plant more crops to get the most of our crop production throughout the year. Another way we can do it, we discussed it, is provide farmers with grants. I've mentioned that before. Or loans with less interest. Okay. Make money accessible to these farmers. Okay. And let them pay back the money and lower interest rate. So eventually it will be more sustainable. And very important what we can do as well. Coming back, once again, it's all interconnected with one another. New farming methods, right? We need to go and have a look at how we farm. We shouldn't practice monoculture. What is monoculture? Monoculture is planting the same crops over and over. So what does it do? It creates soil erosion, right? Soil erosion, it removes all the nutrients from the soil. We should stop over-cultivate. We need the vegetation to recover over time. This is all different types of farming techniques and methods that we need to train people, especially farmers that's subsistence farmers who farms for themselves. So we need to have a look at the way that we farm, that we improve over time. And another thing that we can do, plant frost or drought resistant crops. So it means even though we experience frost in the winter, instead where it will usually kill the crop, it will be able to be resistant, be able to survive. The same with drought-resistant type of crops. It's crops that need very little irrigation or water to be able to survive. So we need to look at techniques as well. And then lastly, we need to go and look at genetically modified crops. Genetically modified crops is basically, it's crops that's been genetically modified to make them drought resistant or to make them frost resistant. Now, I hope, unfortunately, if we look at this graph, we can see there's a serious trend of people moving away from rural areas. And we need to come up with solutions, because in the end of the day, each and every one of us needs to eat. And it's these people in the rural areas that provides us with the food on our table.